Hello and welcome to Insight Reading Enlightenment. I'm Darina Blogina, and today I have the great joy of sharing the first part of my conversation with the wonderful flutist and researcher Rachel Brown. We talk about original Quantz flutes, instruments that, rather like the famous Three Tenors, each have their own temper and personality. Some sing sweetly, others demand the spotlight, and together they remind us that music has always been as much about character as about sound. As flutists, we ask what these instruments can reveal to us today and perhaps what they expect from us in return.
So Darina has asked me to introduce myself and say a little bit about what I do. It reminds me of, I remember reading in the memoirs of Galina...
The composer?
Rostropovich's wife.
Galina Wisniewska.
That's right,
yes.
Thank you.
The opera singer.
And when she first met him, he sort of introduced himself and he said, I teach cello. Maybe he was teaching at the conservatoire or something. And he said this first, before the fact that he was a cellist, because perhaps he thought it would be more impressive, So, I am a teacher and a player. What comes first? It's like the chicken or the egg, isn't it? I really feel everybody should teach if they feel the calling to do so. If you're a great player, people want to learn with you. And if you're just starting out, you may need to earn some money. So the teaching is a very useful way of finding an income. But I suppose my playing has taken many different routes over the years. I started as a child, as a recorded player initially, but then really became a regular modern flute player. And even my first job was with a modern orchestra, Kent Opera in England, which I look back and think how incredibly privileged I was to have that job. It was a wonderful company, a touring company, so we went to lots of different places, always on the road, but with a very open mind about historical performance. They actually had a Baroque orchestra as well. Quite often they were doing Handel operas, so they didn't really need a flute, but when they did need, I was playing, but I was really in the modern orchestra. But with a sort of, they had, the company ethic was that the story of the opera should be very, very clear to the audience. And so for that reason, they chose singers whose words were very clear text, but also very meaningful, and also that the singers acted, and really put the message across. And I think that was a really formative thing for me in my early playing career, because when you've heard singing like that, why would you go back to anything less, really, And I think it had a deep effect on my playing, because I suppose I was always very interested in the articulation that we read about in like Otteter and Quantz and Tromlitz and people like that. But really hearing it in practice, so I think that's really sort of helped me find a path with what I do. So at the same time, because it wasn't a full-time job, it had 2 seasons with that orchestra, I was lucky enough to become involved in a lot of the period instrument ensembles in England. And I suppose now for many years, quite a long time, I've been with the Academy of Ancient Music. And I have my own group, London Handel Players, with my husband and other dear colleagues. And various other orchestras from time to time. So I suppose what I love about playing the historical instruments is is just a different voice from the modern instrument, which I still love very dearly. But there's something deeper, something more mellow. You know, when you hear about people having hearing problems, I'm quite glad I play an instrument which isn't so loud, actually. You know, you don't have to shout at people to make your point. It's and it's such an interesting field because the flute was changing so much during the 18th century that, you know, there isn't one thing which is a Baroque flute. You know, there's so many different styles of instruments, different pitches, different, you know, all sorts of things, even very small, subtle differences in the design of the model make quite a difference to us as players. Yeah, so I suppose a lot of my work has been devoted to the historical performance and then trying to pass it on to the next generation.
Great. I think it's a very noble mission in a way. What is a Baroque flute for you? Because you have mentioned that there are so many things involved into this process of developing of the instrument. How could you define maybe this process and what does it mean to you?
Well, I suppose a Baroque flute covers the period from about, you know, the late 17th century through till the time of Mozart, you know. So within that, you're looking at finding the kind of instruments that the composers might have encountered. And there were regional differences, there were national differences, quite profound, really. So, you know, the pitch, because it was never standardized at that period, you could go, you know, even from different places within one town, or different towns within one country, or from one country to another, and find quite radical changes. So a few years ago, I had an instrument built by Fridtjof Auren of Düsseldorf, and he made a very beautiful Castell model, which is a very lightweight boxwood instrument, only one key, but really from Venice, from around the time of Vivaldi, and it's around 440, maybe a little flatter, but modern pitch, and it's so soft and bird-like, you know. For playing something like Il Gardellino, it's very different to what you might have found, for instance, in Paris, or even possibly at the court of Frederick the Great as well, where the lower pitch was much more the norm. And so when you look at the very early Baroque flutes, which were sort of invented at the end of the 17th century, visually they look very different, much larger, and all the decorative bits on the outside, which of course is rather lovely. But they could be, you know, a whole tone lower than that, or occasionally even more. And so it's like the difference between being a soprano and a contralto, or a real alto. I suppose as the music evolved, the different composers used the instrument in different ways and used different, you know, generally the later you go, the higher they sort of set the center of the instrument, you know. But within that, there's a huge range. So, yeah, those are the two sort of extremes. But then in the middle, there's all sorts of other flutes with different voices, you know. And I suppose one of the great things that I've really devoted a lot of time to in over a long period of time, really, was to explore the Quantz flute. Because everybody uses the Quantz book as a guide to interpretation for 18th century music, of course not just for flute players, and as very much as a guide to interpretation on the flute, both in technical and musical ideas. And yet actually very few people are making Quantz flutes, and very few people are playing Quantz flutes. So I was very, very lucky. I went to the museum in Berlin many years ago, and on my first visit, they wouldn't let me play them. But on my second, I arranged in advance and persuaded them that they should let me play for a very short time. So they allowed me 5 minutes to play this original Quantz flute. And this was life-changing, actually. Because, first of all, it explained several slightly odd things that I had found in the Quantz fingering chart, for instance, as to why he might have used certain fingerings. There were some things which were extraordinary about the instrument, and other things that were I would have found rather difficult. For instance, it seems to have a very long foot joint, and so the bottom D, when I played it in the Cole Museum without warming up and without really being used to it, was very, very low. But that has a knock-on effect on certain other notes. And of course, the two really main features of the Quantz flute are that it has a very wide bore on the inside, and that really favours the low register. Doesn't make it hugely loud, but it is a substantial change. And it also seems to, if anything, I think it helps the cross-fingered notes as well. So actually, this partly explains why you find so many of Quantz's compositions in flat keys. So he loved E flat major, G minor, and there's a sort of warmth in those keys, and also sometimes a richness and particularly G minor, a sort of darkness, So yes, B flat major, also C minor. I went to the library in Berlin, spent a lot of time there, and I think I looked at all 600 concertos and sonatas.
No way.
I think so. It was a lot of pieces. And I was really looking for new repertoire to play. But there were many sort of interpretational questions that I was asking myself at the same time. And one of the things that I was particularly looking for was, would I find pieces in F minor? Because there's a very strange sentence in the Quantz book where he says that the most sort of affecting keys are F minor and D sharp major.
Zerfließe is also written in F minor, and it's a heartbreaking piece, heartbreaking aria.
Yes, and if you listen to any Handel opera and many other composers, at the point of most heartbreak, sure, it's F minor which is used when life couldn't get any worse, when it's the end of the road, when somebody's dying or already died. Yes, it's F minor. And then a few movements later, when there's hope for life after death, or sometimes they discover that the person didn't die, then they'll use something like E major. And it's as though the sun has come out, and before it was the dark clouds. So composers often use F minor as the most desperate of keys, and yet on the flute, it's different again, because you don't actually have very many rich notes in F minor. Most of the notes are cross-fingered, which means that notes like F, A flat, B flat, C, they are all, and in fact E natural also, they are formed from a note which is a semitone higher and brought down a semitone to the pitch that you're trying to get by covering holes lower down the instrument. And that alters the harmonic content of the notes. It takes away usually the first octave harmonic. It is there on the F, but it's because they're sharp, it's not a strong one. So you're talking a much more veiled pastel shaded colour palette, really, than, say, you would get on an oboe or on a stringed instrument. But still, it has, very, very beautiful things. And so, yes, I was particularly looking for pieces. I didn't find anything in D sharp major. And, for anybody else, you would assume he means the same as E flat. And of course, he wrote so many pieces in E flat. But given that he was so fussy about the difference between D sharp and E flat, that's another whole question. But I did find one or two movements in F minor, particularly the slow movement of the B flat major sonata number 275, which has become one of, justly one of my great favourite pieces. It's just so touching. It's a very beautiful piece. So, yeah, the Quantz flute has been a very interesting thing for me. I wanted it to play at low pitch because the original has several centre joints for different pitches. But Rudolf Tutz was adamant we were going to start by making a 415 instrument and work from there. So it took a few years to get all the bits that I needed. And I used it for various recordings in the meantime, at both pitches, actually. It was a wonderful instrument, and I was there while he was making it, which was a very special experience. At the time he made it, he said, I will make two, and then you can choose the one you like. And I thought, gosh, how incredibly generous, So I said very clearly what I wanted, which was a 392 instrument in ebony, because that's what Quantz said made the best flute sound. But he said, no, we'll make one in ebony and one in boxwood. But I said, no, I don't want a boxwood instrument. I want an ebony one. Could you make, please, 2 ebony? And he said, no, we're going to do one in each wood because I want to test them out. Anyway, they both turned out very nicely. But to be honest, the boxwood one just had something extra, you know. And I remember Rudy, he named the 2 flutes. So I'm not a great believer in saying this one's female or male or give it a name or anything like that. But on this occasion, it was around the time of the Three Tenors. And they were, you know, doing the rounds, doing lots of concerts and shows. And, of course, all those 3 tenors have their own individual voices and they're all very special. But, yes, he picked up the ebony one. He said, this one, Carreras. And then the boxwood one he picked up and he said, this one, Pavarotti.
So do you still have this Pavarotti flute?
I have the Pavarotti flute, yes. Yeah. It's a very special instrument. It was always very temperamental. On a great day, it would be phenomenal. You know, something quite different from any other flute I had. On a bad day, I don't know, it seemed to react to the weather or, you know, it was quite, as I say, temperamental. So in order to sort of learn how to get the best out of it, I played almost every concert I did on it for about 9 years. And then it seemed to need a rest. So I've been playing many other instruments since then, but I've revived it recently. And I also had a second Quantz flute from another maker in England, actually, who's also died, sadly now. Lovely man who, his name as a maker is Carl Hansen. Carl's actually his second name. Dudley is his first name. But he was a recorder maker. And he played the flute for his own pleasure, and he used to come to quite a lot of my concerts in the north of England, and so he was so interested in this Quantz flute that I had. He made his one for himself, and several years later I was visiting him again, and I saw the flute in his house, and I said, "That's it, isn't it?" Because every time I'd seen him, I said, "Have you brought it to show me?" And he said, "Oh, no, it's not finished." So I said, "May I try it?" You know, and it was a really extraordinary instrument. So I ended up buying that one from him. It's different from the other one, but they're both substantially bigger, fatter instruments, and it really does make a big difference.
You have been listening to Insight Reading Enlightenment. This was part 1 of my interview with Rachel Brown. A reminder that even wooden tubes from the 18th century can behave like divas. In the next episode, Rachel and I continue our exploration. So do stay tuned. Thank you for listening, for sharing, and for being part of this adventure.